to stand in? Do we need a deputy
No,
mayor?
only if the mayor's not here
Yep.
and the deputy's not here.
Well, it's echoing a bit. This is the ordinary council meeting, 23rd November, commenced at 2:06 p.m. Welcome. The Glamorgan Spring Bay Council acknowledges the traditional owners of our region and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. There are two apologies, Councillor Grant Robinson and Councillor Deputy Mayor Jenny Woods. Are there any late reports?
No.
Are there any declarations of interest or conflict?
Yes, Mayor. I need to declare an interest in item 7.1.
Thank you. Any other declarations of interest or conflicts? Thank you very much. Confirmation of minutes. Could I have a motion? Thank you very much, Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that the minutes of the ordinary meeting of council held on Tuesday the 26th of October 2021 at 2 p.m. be confirmed as a true and correct record.
Was there a seconder? Councillor Simons. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Item 2.2, date and purposes of workshops held. There is a note here of the proceedings during the last workshop on the 9th of November. Can I have a motion? Thank you, Councillor Browning.
I move that council notes the information.
Can I have a seconder? Councillor Churchill, thank you. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Next item, there's been a slight amendment to the published agenda. Page 8, public question time. Now, there are some questions without notice that weren't on the agenda as published on the web. Item 3.2, there are no questions on notice, questions without notice. There's a question from Mr Wesley Button. I refer to the General Manager's letter 29 September in response to my previous question. This letter states that council officers are aware of prior works and required an application to be submitted to council to ensure the application was assessed appropriately and appropriate conditions placed on the permit. Question: I'm unable to find any conditions relating to the above. Can you please direct me to the page and item number that relates to the non-approved works? Response from our General Manager: conditions were applied to ensure that the development must be undertaken in accordance with the approved plans and the information submitted to the application. Question 2. Was a second planning application received that included the non-disclosed earthworks, and if so, provide a copy of this document? Response from the General Manager: no further applications were received. Next one is a question from Mrs Jane Wing. As per Glamorgan Spring Bay Council's 20/22 annual plan, could Council please confirm when a program of community events will be developed and published for the community? Response from the General Manager: as part of the Glamorgan Spring Bay's continuance improvement journey, we have been working on a solution to share community events for many weeks. As there is no current contemporary framework, strategy or program of events, we have been observing, researching and learning as we adopt best practice. We have broadly grouped activities into three main types. Those repetitive on the Australian calendar, sporting, social activities, those that operate in the community ad hoc events that come and go. The program has been planned to create something that is community oriented, user-friendly, engaging and cost-effective, intended to inform our community and visitors about all the exciting things that are happening in our area. A web tool has been built for a program of community events that will allow for visitors to filter for activities by a date, period, by a type of event or region. We anticipate this to be available within the fortnight. Hard copies will be available on request. Now, item 3.3, I won't read out, it's on page 10. They're responses to previous questions taken on notice on the 26th of October. It's published on the agenda, so I won't go through them. Item 2.4 on page 9, responses to questions without notice taken on notice 26th, 2021. Those things, once again, are on the published agenda, both the questions and the response. I don't propose to go through them. Next item is Planning Authority section. Can I have a motion, please? Thank you, Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that council now acts as a planning authority at 2:12 p.m.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Simons. All those in favour of the motion? Contrary? Carried. The first item is 4.1, development application relating to a certificate of title 54 folio 175 1130 Dolphin Sands. It's quite a detailed matter. Can I have a motion? So there's a recommendation on page 30. Can I have a motion? Councillor Churchill.
Pursuant to Section 57 of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993 and the Glamorgan Spring Bay Interim Planning Scheme 2015, Development Application 2021/282 at 1130 Dolphin Sands Road, Dolphin Sands, CT 54666/175 for the construction of a dwelling to be used for visitor accommodation, not be approved.
Is there a seconder? Yes, Councillor Browning. Councillor Churchill, as you are aware, under the Land Use and Planning Approvals Act, if we do propose not to approve a development application, we have to give planning reasons, and some of the grounds upon which some matters can be approved or not approved are discretionary. I'd like to know, when you speak to the motion, what are the reasons for your moving of this motion? Now, please go slowly, because I know that our Minutes Secretary, Jasmine Murray, will type every word down, because if the motion succeeds, we will have to have it as part of the council minutes. Otherwise, there could be a development application and it might cause us trouble. Yes, please go on.
If I may, Mayor, I believe that the reasons for it not being approved have to be included in the actual motion.
Well, you might be right. I haven't I really don't know the answer to the Planned Land Use and Planning Approvals Act. I have asked for a copy. I haven't got it. Please go
You
ahead.
must give Councillor Churchill the opportunity to state the reasons.
Well, Councillor Churchill, if you want to state your reasons by amending the motion, it might solve the problem that might exist.
Yeah, I'm sure there are other reasons, but my concerns are around the height and the bulk of the building. I had a question, if I may, to ask the planner before I proceed any further. I didn't expect to be at this point, I'll be very honest with you. If I may, through the Mayor,
Yes.
Mr. Bonner, can you tell me the floor area of this building? I know that's probably not going to be something you'll have right there, but I think it's 300 metres or in excess of, I'm not sure.
Look, I don't have, as through the Mayor, I don't have that information in front of me. I think the total floor area was around that, 370 or something. But I can't remember if that included the ground floor or if it was just the first floor.
I don't think it did.
I'm going to interrupt. How about we deal with the next motion, or the next item, to give Mr. Bonner a chance to see if he can dig out such information as might be useful to answer the question.
Mr Mayor, if I may,
Yes.
I still come back to the point that that the motion should have not be approved for the following reasons. And then the debate can happen in relation to what those reasons are.
All right.
Can I just
I'll go on.
May I
Councillor
just ask
Churchill?
then, and Councillor Arnold may be able to help. If there are other reasons outside of the reasons that I have, how do they work in? Does that then have to amend the motion as we move along, or because there could be more than my reasons, if you understand what I'm saying?
I do understand, if I may, Mayor.
Please,
I
please go ahead.
I do understand what you're saying, Councillor Churchill, but I don't know that I'm the person to ask the question, to be perfectly honest. I think it's, from the way I understand this, is that for council to go against the recommendation of the planners, we have to have a statement of reasons, and those statement of reasons have to be included totally in the motion, not to approve it.
Councillor Arnold, thank you very much for that. That sounds quite logical, but I pose this question, and it might illustrate the reason why I have some hesitation. If there was a positive motion to approve and it failed, how do we put in the motion failure the grounds upon which it was defeated? It's a difficult matter. I haven't got a copy of the Act in front of me. For the purposes of this matter, I'm happy to do what the... Oh, well, yes, Mr. Bonner might know the answer to this
Or
question.
Mr. Woodward.
Oh, Mr. Woodward, oh, yes.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. What I would suggest is that Councillor Churchill can explain, I guess you're going to speak to the reasons why, and then once those reasons have been discussed, and if there's any questions there, we can answer those questions, and then we can get back to the motion, which we can then obviously you can put to the floor on what your reasons are, and we can put that into the motion itself.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you for that. Puts me out of the jam.
Okay. Well,
Excuse me, Mayor.
Yes.
Do we need a seconder at this stage?
There was a second, that was Councillor Browning.
Not paying attention.
No, I can understand that. It didn't make much of a noise.
so you would now
Councillor
like
Churchill, please.
me to give my reasons.
Yes, please. If you can do them dot point, it'll be easier for me.
Won't be many dot points. My concern is building height. At 7.7 metres high and a floor area of over 300 square metres, the building would have unreasonable impact on adjoining lots from visual bulk and be obtrusive within the surrounding landscape.
Excuse me, the floor area, the area of the whole of the building, or the area of one of the floors, or both of them, in other words?
That is the reason for my question. I'm sure it is for one area, but that's only in my head, because I know that one wall of the building is 10 metres, so it would be unlikely that it was a combination of the two floors.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the upper floor does, if you're just talking about the footprint of the lower floor, the upper floor is larger. It does overhang that footprint. I doubt whether the combined. Are we saying, Mr. Bonner, that the combined floor area is 600 square metres then? Double 300, or is it 300?
I'm just in the process of trying to check the floor area.
Well, Mr. Bonner, our general manager is a qualified surveyor. I wonder whether he could work it out from some of the plans you've produced. That would fix you.
Dimensions, I wouldn't be able to, Mr. Mayor, but they don't have dimensions.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Bonner. He's going to look, I assume, for the
When
answer.
we get a planning approval like this, we usually actually say good plans.
Shall we, in the meantime, get on with the next item of business, or shall we
No.
wait?
No.
No, we must wait.
Okay.
Excuse me, Mayor, have we gleaned the reason, or have we now got a reason
Not yet.
after what
Because
councillor
we
said?
got some reasons, but not all, and I suspect that councillor Churchill might want to amend his motion to include the detail of the reason in the motion to overcome the problems
Yes,
that councillor
okay.
Arnold has raised with us.
And a point, just to clarify, my
Ask the question.
difficult situation where we're asked to change a motion, whereas rather than that, it may have been a matter of those who opposed the motion would wait until the motion was put and then oppose it, so that the wording stays the same. Because I have
Well, that is a problem.
I also have issues with this, and they will need to be recorded if this motion succeeds, because they would also be required to be argued should there be a challenge through the land use planning approval.
That's it.
No,
Luke.
no, RIMPAT, the
Oh,
Resource Management
Yes,
Appeal
well,
Tribunal.
but, I haven't read the Act. I have asked for a copy of it. I haven't got it. There's a difficulty that I foresee, a logical difficulty in some of this. Not only it's the one, what happens if the motion's lost, a for motion is lost. How do you work out the reasons? And the other difficulty is that often happens, and I have spoken to Mr. Lester about it. He has a different view about it than that which I have. Not about this motion, about the thing in principle. That if one person votes against or in favour of knocking back a development for reason A, another person votes for reason B, another person votes for reason C, it would seem to me as a matter of logic, when you consider the way courts work, that each person should give their reason, and then if council is obliged to give reasons for knocking back a development application, each of those reasons for each voter should be produced like a majority judgment in the Supreme Court. Each judge has its own reasons, and you never can always work out what the unanimity is, because one might say, well, I'm against it because I don't like people from Timbuktu. Another one says, I'm against it because I don't like women. And someone else says, I'm against it
Point of order,
because such
Mr
and
Mayor.
such."
Point of order, I'm
All
sorry.
right.
This, we are currently sitting as a planning authority.
We are.
And I don't think the discussion is appropriate.
Well, I'm not going to uphold that point of order. I raised it by way of illustration, not by way of a motion, to try and explain the logic in my thinking.
Understand.
Mr Bonner's back anyway, so we won't proceed.
Through you, Mayor. Apologies, councillors, for that. So
Mike's not on, Mr Bonner.
My apologies to the councillors. So the total floor area is 371 metres squared. The first floor is 238 metres squared,
Thank you.
the enclosed floor area.
That's a qualification. What do you mean by enclosed as opposed to unenclosed floor?
Well, there's an alfresco area as well.
Oh, I see. Mr Churchill, please go on.
I guess now, if I may, I'll speak to the motion. Is that,
The reasons for or against, whatever it is.
yeah, that the motion's just going up. Do we wait until that's up there, or do you want me to speak to the motion first?
Might be a bit easy.
Poor Jazz, she didn't need it.
Councillor Churchill, the motion doesn't appear to make sense. When you say the building is 1.77 metres high,
No, I say it is 7.7 metres high.
The word "at" was missing. Mr Mayor?
that's, is that your reason, Councillor Churchill?
The primary reason.
Does anyone want to speak against the motion?
I want to speak. Oh,
I'm sorry, do you want to
I
speak
haven't
further?
spoken to the motion.
I'm
but
sorry,
I've
please
spoken
go
to the
ahead.
motion.
Sorry, through you, Mr Mayor, just a correction then on the floor area that the planner has now confirmed with us, that is 238 square metres?
Yep.
Yep.
My wording actually says the floor area,
Not the enclosed area.
Not the,
not the enclosed area. So it is actually over 300 square metres.
So it's 240, it's plus 57 square metres for the deck, for the second level. So what's that, two?
And some areas enclosed underneath and some is not.
So it's 290.
Yeah, it's
the top
297
level.
or 290, whatever it is.
Well, Councillor Churchill, that's very definitive, 300. I don't want an argument out of 300 square metres. You want to say approximately or put a lower
295 it
figure
is.
or what?
It's 295, with including the decks.
Yeah, but it is floor area. So does floor area include lower floor area? It does.
No.
No?
through you, Mayor.
Please.
Through you, Mayor. I suppose the floor area of 371 metres squared given on the application form and on page 1 of the plans is the total floor area of the building. So if you break it down to ground level and the first level, or level 1 or level 2 as the plans call it, then the floor level of the habitable area is 238 metres squared. If you were going to say the total floor area of the building, yes, 371.
Right, okay.
Mr Bonner, I've got to ask a question about that. Habitable has a specific meaning. Do you truly mean habitable? It means live in. It doesn't mean garage, it doesn't mean deck.
That's what he's talking
Yes, I do mean habitable in regards to the building code or national construction code.
So a better wording would be, sorry,
Sorry, go on.
Councillor, a better wording would be just under 300 square metres would be more correct.
Well, through you again, Mr Mayor, something that needs to be considered in terms of Councillor Churchill's comment about the obtrusiveness of the structure in relation to the floor area is the fact that council has to consider whether deck is obtrusive or as obtrusive as a closed-in area.
Roger,
Which if you're
To a
talking
logical
about
comment.
bulk, you're talking about the decks as well.
Mm.
That's the argument.
Yeah, in my head, the deck is still part of what is seen. That's in my head, but if it's planning-wise not correct, then I understand that. It's, yeah, in my view, it should be included. It's the footprint of the actual footprint of the building. So I think to say it is almost 300 square metres would be not an unreasonable word to use.
you content with the wording that's on the board so far?
I think so.
So it reads at 7.7 metres high and a floor area of just under 300 square metres, this building would have an unreasonable impact on the adjoining lots from visual, bulk, and be obtrusive within the surrounding landscape. Are there any other reasons you wish to put?
I'd just like to speak to the motion.
Please do.
Firstly, I want to say that I thought that the representations on this development were of a high quality. These people seemed to have some quite justified reasons for their representations. They included many things that were outside of our remit as a planning authority. However, there are significant concerns expressed that are within the standards of the planning scheme, and we must consider those, some of which are discretionary. Dolphin Sands is a particular purpose zone under the interim planning scheme 2015. It is a PPZ for the following reasons. It is to protect the environmentally fragile nature of Dolphin Sands area with respect to land stability, vegetation, wildlife and landscape amenity, and to ensure that the development has minimal disturbance to the natural environment and visual amenity of the area. Those words come directly out of the PPZ, straight from our interim planning scheme. My primary issue here is standard 34.4.1, which is building height. The acceptable solution is 5 metres. At 7.7 metres, it is clearly above the 5 metres allowed under the scheme. It's over 50% higher. And I think it's unreasonable to say that a building of that size in that landscape is not going to be obtrusive. And from an environmental point of view, it probably has a lot of other issues as well, but my major concern is this one. It's the bulk of the building and the height of the building. Thank you.
Does anyone wish to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Bruni, you wanted to say something?
Thank you, Mayor. I just required some clarification that has already been given in relation to the word floor area. I will be supporting this motion. I assume that there is an opportunity for anybody who wants to oppose the motion before I do.
I'll ask for those. Do you want to oppose the motion, please? Yes, Councillor Arnold.
Thank you. We don't really have a lot to say, Mayor, about it, other than I won't support the motion. We received a significant briefing in relation to this particular development, and all the matters that have been raised in the motion have been responded to by the planner in their report in relation to recommendation to approve. So I can't support this motion.
Does anyone else wish to speak either for or against?
Yeah,
Councillor?
look, I appreciate Councillor Churchill's concerns and Councillor Bruni as well, but I'm of the same opinion that our planner has given us quite a detailed report, and he's addressed the height issues, which seem to be consistent with the dwellings in the area, that it seemed to be of a, or according to our planner's report, are of a similar height and a similar size. So on those grounds, I can't support the motion.
Anyone else wish to speak? Yes, Councillor Browning.
Through the Mayor, I've written, this development does not comply with 34.4 Development Standard of Building and Works in the particular purpose zone 3 Dolphin Sands. It does not comply with either the acceptable solution criteria, nor is it able to meet the performance criteria P1A regarding 34.4.1, which relates to the height of the building. So my reasons are the same as Councillor Churchill's, as the bulk and the size, and so I will be supporting this motion. The performance criteria P1A states that the building height of a development must be unobtrusive within the surrounding landscape, and as the proposed development will be very noticeable in the landscape, it doesn't meet the performance criteria. It may be argued that the other buildings in the vicinity are obtrusive, however, because of the size of every property in this area, all at least 2 hectares in size. Each separate building can be obtrusive in its own right. In a more dense situation, it wouldn't be obtrusive, but they all look obtrusive. So I will be supporting the motion.
Councillor Browning, you wish to say something?
Yes, I'll be supporting the motion as well. On a couple of points I'd like to raise. One is in agreement with, in relation, pardon me, to the height of the building. In instances that were given for compliance with the performance criteria, I think there were 6 dwellings adjacent to this one where the height of the building, AHD, above height datum, Australian height datum, was quoted as being a reason for allowing the height, the Australian height datum level of the building roof to be compliant with the surrounding landscape. In fact, this building is higher than the highest AHD level of any of those samples given. Most of them were 4.4, 4.5, I can't recall exactly from the report, but one was 7 point something, but this one is 7.7, which is higher, which means it's not in keeping to the letter of the word with the surrounding height and the surrounding buildings. It's actually higher than all of them as far as AHD goes. The fact that it's 5.5 metres above existing ground level seems to indicate that we have to make a decision in relation to whether or not this is, in relation to this motion, whether it is, I can't remember the name, the actual word, but it's in relation to the way that it sits in the landscape. This building is sitting higher in the landscape than all of the examples that were given in the report. Having said that, it's a matter for us, as we have learnt recently in relation to being a planning authority, to accept professional advice as it's given to us. However, our discretion is something that we have to take. And in my opinion, the discretion that I have to apply here is the fact that this building is in fact higher from an AHD point of view, regardless of how high it is above the ground, really. It's higher than all the adjoining buildings that have been used as a reason for accepting this height. It just seems that the next one that comes along, we're going to be asked to accept that too because it's higher than this one and whatever. Whether that's a valid point or not, I don't know. However, my second point is this. Pardon me. I've gone through the report in relation to, I think it's called Coastal Erosion Hazards Assessment, Site Classification, On-Site Wastewater Disposal Assessment and Design, and On-Site Stormwater Disposal Assessment and Design. A couple of issues have been raised. Pardon me. The first one is, apparently there is a requirement that all wastewater treatment and all wastewater, grey water I presume, must be treated and cannot infuse into the ground. It has to be all development for that has to be 1.5 metres above groundwater level. As far as I'm aware, the test results that are shown here show that groundwater was intersected at 0.9 metres. Now, nowhere that I could find, unless I look closer at the map, I was very concerned that the aerated water treatment irrigation zone was, I presume, 100 metres from the foreshore, which is the minimum setback requirement. But the requirement is that the water, treatment of water, must be a minimum of 1.5 above ground level, above groundwater level. I'm not sure from the plans that I've seen that the area that's been allocated for irrigation of the treated water, secondary treatment, I think it is clear of that 0.9 metre groundwater level. I don't know where the bores were taken. There were only 3 and they all encountered groundwater within the 1.5 metres. For that reason, I'm not happy to just accept that without being reassured to a level that satisfies me that the report itself has provided us with enough information. I can't support the motion. The third point is this. Clearly on pages of the attachments, page 31 of 121, and I'll go into pages 32 and 43 and 45 as well. But in page 31, it clearly indicates that coastal inundation assessment indicates that portions of the dwelling, and they are substantial portions of the dwelling, are within the storm tide 1% average exceedance probability, which is the fact that it'll get inundated, for 2050. That's not far away. The dwelling is also within the medium, that's on page 31, in relation to the coastal vulnerability soft shores mapping. It's also within the medium hazards areas of the coastal vulnerability. This is, by the way, these maps that have been produced are not maps produced by this developer or anybody else or whatever. These are the government maps on the list. They've been set as the minimum and standard requirement for developments such as this. And to take into account also consideration, as far as I'm concerned, they are current status, and I would venture to assume that anybody who ignored the fact that given the current situation in relation to the rapid change in climate, including sea level rise, etc., that could be dramatically different to what we're looking at here, we would be less than prudent if we didn't assume that these were best case scenarios, not worst. The other thing that worries me...
So this is the fourth point now you're raising, is that correct?
It's still the same one.
Oh, thank you.
The other issues are in relation to, as I've said, the coastal inundation assessments. On page 42, 43 and 45 are maps that show us, A, on 42, sea level rise 2050, storm surge 2050 and 2100, and coastal erosion hazard bands. This development encroaches into all of those. The houses, as you can see on that map, that I'll try to find quickly. I'm trying to discern which is the projected sea level rise, 2100. This, all of the house will be, or most of the dwelling will be flooded. Storms.
What date did you say?
2100. And storm surge 2050, the property will be inundated as well. This is the issue that I have, and unless I have an assurance that council will not be liable for any risk or claim against it, that is this planning authority, for permitting a development where it is clearly stated to us that this building is subject to hazard within the foreseeable future, given what we know now about climate and storm surge, etc. If we accept that this is acceptable, will we be liable should somebody claim that we were negligent in not taking this into account? Well, I intend to take it into account, and that's why I won't be supporting, I will be supporting the motion. And I will finish by making a comment about page 32 of 121. It's item 6, I believe. And it's the first paragraph after discussion and recommendations. And it states, based on the findings of the recent investigation and the above coastal erosion and inundation risk assessment and the required development controls, we consider, this is the report by the person who looks at these issues, the engineering consultant, we consider that the proposed residential development within the southern portion of the site may be adversely impacted by coastal erosion and inundation. Full stop. No ifs, no buts, full stop. I will be supporting this motion. Thank you.
I'd like to say something, if everyone else has finished what they have to say. Councillor Simon.
Thanks, Councillor Bruni, and that's some very good points you've raised there, and I'd like to perhaps know how as a council we look at that ourselves. But just back to your first point, and as far as I might need some clarification here from the planner, the height data information that Councillor Bruni was saying that the existing houses were somewhat lower than the proposal of this house. This one has a AHD of 9.5 metres, and please, Mr. Bonner, pick me up if this isn't correct. The examples you've given, number 10, number 1094 is 9.1 AHD, 10 to 11 at 1110. We've got a 9.62, we've got an 8 metre, we've got an 11.6 metre and a 9.5 metre. So can you just clarify that maybe, I'm not sure if Councillor Bruni was quite correct with the heights we're getting there. That does, the examples we've been given actually show this house was at 9.5 AHD. The existing houses are all pretty similar to that height. There's only one there I can see.
Can I, in answer to Councillor Simon's question?
Well, perhaps Mr. Bonner ought to respond to the query
sure.
raised. Then if you wish to say something about it, Councillor Bruni, please do.
Through you, Mayor. Yes, so the AHD for the proposed development is at 9.5 metres. What I did was look at the properties in the immediate vicinity of it and looked at their AHD. So while a lot of the dwellings are 4.6 metres, 4 metres, 4.2, some are higher, it was more looking at their height above sea level and considering it in the landscape. So we've got dwellings in the vicinity that have a AHD of 9.62 metres, 9.5, 11.6 and around about 10 to 11 metres. It was a bit hard to determine because the details weren't that clear on the documents from earlier for some of the approvals.
Councillor Brenny, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I made an error in mentioning AHD. I should have mentioned height of dwelling, actual height
Yep.
of dwelling. This is the highest dwelling of those listed, I believe.
Does anyone else wish to say something? I would like to, Councillor Brenny, before you've got a right of reply, I think. Before you deal with that, I'd like to raise two things. First, matter of procedure, if Councillor Arnold is correct, and she may well be, about all the reasons for this refusal, if it is passed, have to be in the motion. It may be that the 3 points that Councillor Brenny relied on, if they're in addition to the point already mentioned by Councillor Brenny, ought to be in the motion. And that's just to protect council against an argument. Well, it's not in the motion, Planning Appeal Board or Resource Management Planning Appeal Board, therefore they can't rely on those points in knocking it back and limiting the argument if a developer takes an appeal. That's a procedural matter which I think we ought to address. The substantive thing that causes me worry is on page 28 of the agenda, Mr Bonner's dealing, nothing wrong with Mr Bonner's way of looking at it. I think it's a very good report and he's to be commended for it. But one of the representors apparently makes a representation. The proposed residence is taking advantage of illegally excavated frontal dunes. The response to that is the previously excavated frontal dune is not relevant to the current application and no works are proposed to the dune. I assume that's a previously excavated dune. If logically that is a fair response that we ought to adhere to, I could quite well imagine a situation in a more, how do I put it, where it involves a lot more money. Bill Smith comes along, excavates the dune, sells it to Councillor X or Tom Jones, and Tom Jones then builds a nice big house relying on the illegally excavated dune, both being have particular knowledge of the fact, and Mr X coming along to build his nice big house knows of the illegal excavation, knows it won't be taken into account, but he's prepared to pay more money to build that illegally excavated the dune because of the excavation. So the question is, does a prior illegal activity which benefits a subsequent developer, does that have to be taken into account or ought it be excluded? It causes me some concern, possibly because I've seen some of these things occur.
Irrelevant.
And that's what worries me about it. Now, if it is something that should not be considered, if it was illegally excavated long before our planning scheme, we couldn't take it into account. If it was illegally excavated during the course of our planning scheme, perhaps we should. I don't know the answer to it, but I see it as a problem. And so thus, there are two matters. One, possible further amendment of the motion to include extra reasons, so we don't get beaten up on a procedural matter. And two, how do we consider the question of Illegal excavation. No,
Mr.
I don't know
Mayor,
whether anyone's got any comment to make about that.
Mr Mayor, can I make a comment
Please.
about the previous, councillor Brini's,
Yes.
observations or objections, or reasons for the objections? And that is around the height. The height isn't keeping, the height datum above sea level isn't keeping with the surrounding buildings. That's made quite clear in the report, and that's what the planner has picked up. If you're just talking about the height of the building, we get back to the discussions we had fairly recently here with an external party, where that external party was saying council needs to be cognizant, wearing its planning hat, of the lie of the land, and the fact that a building sitting on top of a sand dune, for example, at that same height would have a far bigger intrusion than this one sitting at the lower level. So it gets back to the height datum, average height datum. You're quite right, and that height datum for this building is in keeping with buildings in the surrounding area. The second thing I just want to make about the dwelling and the flood-prone or coastal climate change-prone area is, my understanding is that the lower level is non-habitable. Is that correct? So we're only talking about the upper level, which is habitable, and from a planning perspective, that's what needs to be considered by this council, not the lower level.
Do I have a reply to that?
Oh, well, Councillor Arnold, you'd like to say something, please say it.
Well, Mr Mayor, I have already spoken about my objection, but I would like to take up something that Councillor Brini said, with your permission.
Please, I've invited you.
Thank you. And it relates to page 32 of the attachments, and it's the discussion and recommendation section. And it's the section that Councillor Brini read out that said, within the southern portion of the site may be adversely impacted by coastal erosion and inundation. And Councillor Brini added, it's full stop, that's it. However, a little bit further down in that particular section, it does say that if there are the development controls are put into place, then the qualitative risks presented by coastal erosion on the proposed development are low. And further down, the last paragraph before section 7 says, as such, in accordance, second last, the penultimate paragraph says, as the habitable rooms are above RL 2.5 AHD, with footings founded 2 metres below the AHD, the proposed development satisfies the inundation criteria defined by DPAC and the requirements of the Glamorgan Spring Bay Interim Planning Scheme 2015. As such, in accordance with the Glamorgan Spring Bay Interim Planning Scheme, the likelihood of the proposed development being affected by projected shoreline recession and inundation to 2071, the 50-year design life, is considered acceptable. So I'm just a little bit confused about Councillor Brini's argument in relation to that.
Councillor Brini, you wanted to speak?
Two things. The first, I'll address your Councillor Arnold's comment. The report, and I can only assume it because I haven't had it clarified by the author of the report. The report indicates that they have used the Tasmanian government's projected sea level rise maps as projected on the list format. Those maps and the date of the production of them may well have preceded the damage that was done to the 4 June by the previous owner, which substantially, if you have a look at the photograph that is indicated with the attachments of that encroachment, that would dramatically affect the storm surge and flooding situation. The fact that I'm not certain of when this map was produced or the mapping under list was produced, or the actual date of that clearing of the June, it's been bulldozed and it's about 3 metres lower than normal, or 2 metres at least, lower than the adjoining dunes. That has a substantial impact on whether or not the flooding that we see in this map is actually current level or whether it's preceding that cutting. So, yes, I understand the mitigating situations that the report relates to and the fact that, you know, these maps are assessments and they could change. Could be less or more. My opinion, personal, is that this is the best, as I said, the best case scenario, not the worst. The other issue in relation to the height, the AHD being relatively compliant with the adjoining places, that may be the case, but the comment that it's in keeping with the amenity of the area is what I disagree with. I disagree with the bulk of the building itself. The floor level of the lower area is 1.8 AHD. The floor level of the top area is 5 point whatever, it's 4.75 I think, or something like that. I can't remember. Substantially higher than needs to be from the point of view of height. And would this building have been, as I've said, if this building was relocated to a place that wasn't affected by sea level rise, storm surge, etc., and the height of the building was reduced by approximately 0.5 of a metre, I'd be far more likely to accept this, because it would then be, in my opinion, unobtrusive in the landscape. It would be compliant with all building codes because it'll still have plenty of room underneath to provide a 2.4 clearance, 3.5 actually. So I am aware of our requirement, by the way, to act from a planning authority point of view, looking at the information without looking at it from an emotive point of view. I'm looking at this from the point of view of actual figures and maps that I see, and my own discretionary feeling is that this, unless I can be reassured, and it could be the General Manager who could reassure me, if in the future a landowner, this or others, come along and say to council after they've been flooded, why didn't you take note of this? Are we accepting a risk by looking at that map and saying, yes, it's going to be flooded, and doing nothing about it?
Well, I could make a comment, but am I a suitably qualified person? That's the question. It's a question of what is the liability of council on this unusual area. I suspect liability is extending, but whether it'll extend this far is a matter, it could only be a guess, as I understand it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we've got a bit of an irony here too, I suppose, in that if on the one hand we are concerned about floor levels and the risk of coastal erosion and inundation, and on the other hand we're concerned about height, we got to just ask ourselves, well, what developments are going to be applicable in Dolphin Sands in the future? And you can't try and mitigate both. The fact of the matter with this development, the key facts of everything that I've heard from Councillor Churchill and Councillor Browning and Councillor Brini is that it is in keeping in terms of height and possibly even bulk with the other development in the area, and the lower level is not habitable. The lower level is not habitable. So the day that upper level gets flooded, we're all in a big strife.
Well,
Can I reply to that, please?
Please respond. You have to have this out.
I wasn't-
We don't adhere to the rules of
When I was looking, well, I'd like to make sure that I'm adhering to the rules.
You're probably not, but I invite you to respond.
If I'm advised that I'm probably not, I'm not going to respond.
Well, I'm going to say something. I've been cogitating whether I should support this motion or not. One of the difficulties is the matter that Councillor Arnold wisely raised. Should the reasons for rejection be in the motion? You've mentioned, Councillor Bruni, 3 reasons. I haven't noted them down. I mentioned one concern about the question of illegality and the subsequent action. They're not in the motion. I wonder whether the mover of the motion thinks they ought to be in there if we're going to rely upon them.
As the mover of the motion, I would need advice on that. Quite clearly, I do not know is the answer, but I would have thought, I don't know how the tribunal works with these things. If it went to a tribunal, do they consider the discussion that we've had? Do they only consider the motion?
I pose this question that might give you the answer if you apply your mind to it. If the reasons were put in the motion, they could not be ignored and there wouldn't be a risk. But if they weren't in the if all the reasons weren't in the motion, there's a chance they may not be ignored, and that might sharpen your mind on the matter. Councillor Churchill.
If I may, Mayor, just on that inundation situation, there's some words here in the in our report on page 25 of the agenda, where it talks about the potential for inundation. Now, my understanding is that the building has to retain access to the building in the instance of inundation, and it says here quite clearly, access to the site will not be lost or substantially compromised due to future sea level rise. I find this really...
Excuse me, wait to what document are you referring?
Of the agenda. Right at the top of the page, it says access to the site will not be lost or substantially compromised due to future sea level rise. Now, if we've already reduced, it's below the recommended 2.3 metre AHD for coastal inundation. It's down to 1.8, so it's half a metre below the recommendation for that. But here in the report, it's saying access to the site will not be lost or substantially compromised due to future sea level rise. I find that statement hard to understand in the context of the water going into this area. Unfortunately, we can't get onto these sites ourselves physically to look at them and actually assess them. And I think this is one of the best examples I've seen where, as councillors, we should have access to the site so that we can actually visualise it. Because what I see there is a flat table that's been flattened below the recommended level for inundation, and then the house has been built from that level right up to the height of all these other buildings. The other buildings there that we've referred to, with the exception of one, are all relatively normal height buildings in these comparison ones, the neighbouring ones. They're all 6 metres, 4.6 metres. There's one there that's 7.5 metres, and that's on lot 2010. If you have a look at the photograph for lot 2010, what it really is an add-on to an existing house. It does not contain the bulk that this building will potentially contain. And you can see that on a photograph it's in the agenda once again. I've lost the page for that one. But it's the 23, is it? Yeah. Thank you, thanks for that. Yeah, page 23, if you look there, you can see the most prominent house there to the left of that photograph is 1110, and that is a piece that's been built on the top of a house which contains nowhere near the bulk that this one contains. And also, I believe that because this building started at such a low level, it is still 9.5 AHD. That is an indication of the massive bulk of this building compared to, I shouldn't use the word massive, that's emotive, but the great bulk of this building compared to the other buildings around there. This little one on 1110, that addition, is the only one of all the ones that's given to us that is in fact 2 stories. Now, like it or not, this is a 2-storey building. I don't think we can deny that. At least in bulk appearance, it is 2 floors. So what it does to me, it exaggerates, it actually makes more clear in my mind that the whole of that height, almost right to the top of the building, is building. It is not been put on a dune and then the building above that to bring it to the same AHD. It's actually the whole building composes the whole of what we're going to see as visual bulk. Did I make that as clear as mud or not?
It's somewhat followable, but it's not easy to follow. Does anyone wish to say anything further?
Can I just say something to you, Mr. Mayor,
please
again?
say.
Please, sorry, just in regards to the accessibility point that Councillor Churchill raised. Again, I get back to what do we as a planning authority want for Dolphin Sands? And if low-lying driveways, which exist there aplenty, and we could go up and visit at any time and you'd see them for yourselves, are a problem, and in terms of accessibility, then I think it's a moot point. I think it's going to be hard to argue with the tribunal to say that all these properties need access at all time if there was inundation, because as you know, that it's very undulating sand dune land, and in any inundation event or high rainfall event, there will be areas, there are driveways right there now that would probably be impossible. So I think, we just got to be careful that we're not suggesting that in future, with all such applications, we're also going to be requiring the property developer to build up his driveway by a metre to make it accessible to the house at all times.
May I respond?
Thank you. Yes, please.
It's just that, see, this is why I said this would be a real good case for us to be on site so we can understand it. You've misconstrued, if I may say, that I'm talking about the driveway. I'm actually talking about the area where the house is being built. That's been cut down to that 1.8 metre level from 2.3. Am I correct? So it's brought it down below the 2.3 required. It's actually been cut down, levelled out. So it's where the house
Mr.
is
Bonner,
being
you're asked
built.
a question.
It is
You
not
can
the
answer it in a minute.
It is not the driveway coming into the house that I'm concerned about. If inundation occurs, this house is going to be sitting in a depth of water because that's the lowest point of the block by a long way.
Mr. Bonner, you're asked a question. You want to answer it?
Look, I wouldn't agree that the land has been reduced in height below 2.3 metres AHD. It has been levelled in the past by a previous owner. There has been some reduction. I wouldn't say it's a substantial reduction, but I don't believe it is to the extent of 2.3 down to 1.8.
Okay, thank you for that. But it still makes the point that it is still a very, very low point of the block to build such a substantial house, which will be the first area for inundation to occur.
Well, it is closest to the foreshore. I'm going to say one more thing and leave it at that. Unless all the reasons for rejection are in the motion, I propose to vote against it. But there appear to be 5 reasons that are not in the motion for rejection. For the 3 reasons of Mr. Breeny, Councillor Breeny, there's one, the question of illegality benefiting a subsequent owner. Don't say they're in cahoots, but closely benefiting. And is the question of access to the site, one would assume, habitable site. So that means the first floor. So I'd say illegality and access to the site. So unless they're in the motion, I propose to vote against it. So inviting you, Councillor Brenny, to amend the motion.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, can I just make...
Councillor Churchill, to amend the motion.
Can I just make one before we do that, just by way of the record and get the wording right? Instead of not be approved, we need to use the wording be refused.
Thank you.
taking out a legalese word and putting in a simple English one, to be commended.
I'm happy for the motion to be amended.
Well, it's your motion, you'll have to do the amendment. You may confer with councillor Breeny if necessary.
I'm conferring with councillor Breedy now.
Just that, just state that. The proposed dwelling.
As I understand it, from what Judge Bonner said,
And that'll be the only one.
the person who flattened the area did it just before the purchase of this lot.
That could possibly have happened, I don't know.
It looks like a recent flattening, that's... But to cover the matter that Cheryl raised, I think we've got to put it in the motion, and I'll make a point of looking it up later. We might have a fight on the hands over this. What's that?
Can we put amendments into the approved, the original motion?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Mark, what's it?
Is there an option here to put amendments into the planner's original recommendation that might give us some coverage on the concerns?
Fast enough
No.
to think it through.
So this motion could go down and then we could bring that other motion back and add some...
Can't bring it back.
Oh, can't we?
We need
I'm sitting here quietly waiting for people to say something. Director Alex Woodward.
Is that a thing, Cheryl? If this motion was not passed? Yeah, that should get in order.
Points are raised, I think they've got merit. Do you want to use one of the mics here?
Yeah.
Through you, Mayor. So if the motion isn't passed on this one, so then another motion will need to be put because we'll need to have a decision.
Yep. And that other motion could potentially be the original planner's motion, and that could potentially have some amendments attached to it.
a foreshadowed motion.
Well, let's deal with this motion first and we'll worry about the next procedural step next, if you don't mind, only on the grounds that my simple mind can only do one thing at a time.
Just the wording in this one, councillor Breedy, it's got that the proposed dwelling is
Yes.
unacceptably impacted by sea level rise and storm surge. Shouldn't that be, the proposed dwelling is potentially,
Oh,
Because it's
unacceptably, oh yeah, that's not the right word, potentially, yes, thank you,
potentially impacted?
yes.
Could be potentially impacted rather than is?
No,
Could be.
That ought to be split into two sentences. Because otherwise you'll be caught with the argument, it won't do both, it might do one, but not the other, it won't do both, and therefore it won't work. You can't rely on one of them.
Through Mr Mayor, I think that's a little bit misleading in that we're talking about a dwelling. We need to make the point that it's the non-habitable portion of the dwelling. There's a very big difference between a dwelling and habitation than non-habitable and underground, the garage area. Or
Habitation means something.
The
and it's
potential
different.
structure. Building?
The structure, the footings
Well,
that are...
Potential building. Just say building.
I've looked at the issue from the point of view of the structure itself, not just the habitable area and the floor area.
Well, this proposed
The pro-
structure,
The structure includes footings where there has been a recommendation for a minimum of 2 metre deep footing, or something like that. I can't remember the exact figure, but there are substantial works required to ensure that this complies with a building code which requires certain building requirements which, by the way, none are shown in the conditions of this permit, the original permit, the requirements are quite substantial to handle the existing situation.
Well, do you want to put building
The building there, that covers it.
instead of dwelling?
Thank you. And in relation to habitable and non-habitable,
No, well, at the moment, let's deal
my
with...
question was in relation to liability that council and the planning authority has if we approve a development that is going to be substantially impacted, and it states it is going to be impacted by these factors. And I have made no qualification between habitable and non-habitable, because if I were a person who, and quite clearly this development does seem to indicate that, although it's probably not stated in the statements, but it has been mentioned in passing, the underside, the bottom floor, is to be used for storage of, and the reason why it's so high and can't be lowered, which it could be, 5.5 metres if it wasn't the case, that the person might want to store a boat there or cars in the car park. I consider that the damage to those things by flooding is just as important as flooding to carpet and furniture on the upper floor. So my qualification of what's liable to be impacted by flooding does not limit itself to habitable rooms.
There should be something else here. Where it says sea level rise, it should be sea level rise or storm surge or both. Otherwise you can't do one as opposed to the other.
Thank you.
It should be sea or storm surge or both, comma, or both. There should be item 3 there, but are they your 3 points, councillor Rooney?
That's all of them.
There should be a third item. Before I'd vote for it, if you'd be happy to put it in there, councillor Churchill. And it would be that... I'll just find the bit.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, can I just add something here?
Yes, please.
Council can add the reasons and the discussion around these at a later stage. We really, council just needs to decide whether it supports the motion or not at this point. We can do the detail with all the reasonings, all the discussion at a later stage.
Well, I would like to put in item 3, and that is the site appears to have been illegally excavated, thus enabling this development to proceed in its current form.
If I may say, Mayor, I would feel uncomfortable with that without advice from our planner, because I'm not sure that this is in the remit of us as a planning authority.
All right, then I'll put it in another way. A previously illegal act can't make this development fit within the scheme. The illegal act being excavation. Yes, please go ahead.
Through you, Mayor. So I think to ensure you're complying with the meeting regulations, that if you're going to move a motion that the original motion stays, which is just number 1, and then if you're going to have to amend it, then you'd need to do an amended motion. But as the General Manager rightly pointed out, we can add further detail at the refusal stage through the planning process if it gets appealed.
Well, but, so in other words, if this motion passed, we then have to deal with the earlier recommendation, is that correct?
Through you, Mayor, no, because there wasn't a motion to move that. So
Just say it again, please. for dumb people like me.
So the original the original recommendation wasn't moved by anybody. So there was a straight alternate motion from Councillor Churchill. So the planner's recommendation was not moved.
So that means we can pass this or not?
Yes, but with number 2 taken out because that wasn't part of the original motion. Original amendment, sorry.
Which was Councillor Churchill's.
Councillor Churchill, do you want to make any comment?
I'm comfortable with that, under advice from the director.
Well, I've got a second comment to make again. Access to the site, I assume, when you look at page 24 and page 25, it's habitable site, it's not just any site, it's got to be the building. Access to this habitable site will be lost or substantially compromised by future sea level rise, because that's converting a negative to a positive, because at the site, well, it's the buildings, Ireland, but I can't do it on the run, I'm sorry. No more comment, I'll put the motion, all those favour? Against? Please note me as an abstention. I can't work it out. It was passed by 3. It was Councillor Bruni, Councillor Browning and Councillor Churchill.
Mr. Webb.
What's it?
An abstinence is a no vote.
That's right.
Therefore,
An abstention is a no vote, so there's no decision being made.
Yeah, that's quite true. Means there's no decision made, so the still thing, we still have the original development application before us. If we don't approve it or disapprove it, is it 42 days? It's deemed to be approved.
No.
Is that not right under the Land Use and Planning Approval Act?
Just let Alex explain.
It used to be the law, whether it still is, I don't know.
If a decision is not made, it's deemed to be approved, and the conditions, we go before the tribunal for conditions, and all costs to be borne by council.
And what a joy.
Mr.
Do we put the,
Mr.
go on,
Wick,
please, go on. Yes,
Can I
please, Councillor
just
Arnold.
make the point, though, that we were in this situation some time ago where it was a tied vote and council didn't proceed to make any further decision in relation to it, and we were later told that we hadn't made a decision. So because we hadn't made a decision, we have to make a decision in planning, as I understand it.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Mayor, so I
Yeah,
go
please,
back to Mr. Bonner's comment. If it was a no vote or an even vote is a
It's a
is a
negative.
vote. Yep, the vote in favour. So
But it's
say again, please.
Yeah.
well, if the mayor is abstaining,
Well, it's a no vote, it's
as
quite true.
it's a no vote.
So doesn't that mean that the vote is lost?
Yeah.
This motion is lost.
This motion is-
And then-
No, I think I stand corrected. I think the general manager can make a determination under the planning. Is that right, Mr. Woodward?
Through you, Mayor, that I believe that the general manager does have delegation if the council's unable to reach a
Well, there's a difficulty in
However,
that.
yes.
And the
there is a
difficulty is
difficulty.
this, council have decided to deal with the matter and the general manager can't step back in and deal with it. It's an obvious conclusion on a matter of statutory construction. But it does mean there's an application before the council which hasn't been dealt with. And we're in a position where if it's not dealt with, it's deemed to be approved and the conditions dealt with by the tribunal. There are two ways we can deal with that. We can negotiate a form of condition with the development, the applicants, and get a submission to the tribunal, and I'm not sure if we can deal with the bloody thing now. I'm sorry, the thing now.
Through you, Mayor, that if if it does go down that path, I would caution you that the costs associated with doing such a thing would be extremely large, and we would highly recommend to try and seek another motion.
Yes. Well, Mr Woodward, you've had some experience in other councils in dealing with this sort of situation. What has happened there from your knowledge?
I guess it's continued to be debated, or an alternate motion is put, and the reasons for and against and debated, and a decision is reached.
So,
Can I ask what our time frame is on this? What is the date?
5th of December.
Thank you.
Councillor Bruni.
Thank you, Mayor. Given the decision of my fellow councillors, I am recommending to council that we consider the original motion and put that to a vote.
And if it's refused, if the original motion is moved in the form recommended and it is lost, we still have to give reasons, otherwise we run the risk of appeal and costs.
Can I answer to that?
Yes,
Yes,
please.
that's the case, unless a councillor decides to alter his vote in order to ensure that this matter is dealt with.
Oh, that's quite right. I mean, we're not bound to vote in yea or nay in any other motion.
So we need to put the original motion.
Well, someone has to move the original motion.
Mr Mayor, for the purposes of the debate then, I'll move that pursuant to section 57 of the Land Use Planning and Approval Act 1993 and the Glamorgan Spring Bay Interim Planning Scheme 2015 Development Application 2021/282 at, I think it should be RA 1130 Dolphin Sands Road, Dolphin Sands, CT 54666/175, for the construction of a dwelling to be used for visitor accommodation be approved with the following conditions 1 to 8 and the advice and the associated advice.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Simons. Well, I think Councillor Arnold, you better speak to it and try and help put us out of our misery.
I don't think I've actually got anything to say, Mr Mayor. We've had significant debate around it and I think the information that's been provided both in our briefing and in this document from the planner really doesn't give me any other cause to vote any other way but for the development.
Councillor Simons.
Yes, I would echo those thoughts. I absolutely understand the concerns of the other councillors and they are valid and relevant. But as a planning authority, we are bound by some very strict rules, and in an effort not to cost ratepayers unduly, I feel like we're in a position that we have to approve this as is.
Does anyone else want to say anything or got any useful suggestions? Yes, Councillor Churchill.
I just want to say something briefly. It's probably not a useful suggestion.
Well,
but-
please say it.
But this is where we, as a statutory body, are so severely compromised. And I totally understand what Councillor Arnold, Councillor Simons are getting at here. I totally understand this. And it is a sad state, if I may say so, that effectively the impact on council might override a decision that is perhaps better for environment and amenity and all those other things that we've been considering. And I think it's just a very, very hard position to be put in. And I guess it's why some of us don't like planning.
Well, perhaps it ought not to be the Local Government Act 1993, Tasmania, but it ought to be the Land Use and Planning Approvals Act that requires some amendment to sort part of the difficulties that arise from that statute.
If I may say so, Mayor, in our, I wasn't going to raise this, but in our LPS that's been put through, this whole issue has been addressed.
That's local planning scheme
Yes,
and has not yet been approved, is
No.
it?
because we deferred it.
Just looking at I might want to say something about this. How much does the proposed development exceed the height level by how many metres?
2.7.
Can I move an amendment to the motion?
To leave the chair to do that, you can't move a
Well,
motion
they
unless you leave the chair.
haven't got a, do you want to take the chair,
Suggested
Councillor
amendment.
Arnold? Oh, no, you probably can't do it because you've moved the motion. Who takes the chair?
Oh, we have to add the amendment.
I would have to, I've got to move an amendment to the motion.
You can make a suggestion.
Go on, any use?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, the council could consider a special meeting to deal with this matter in a very short time frame.
Oh, that's right, I could adjourn the meeting to tomorrow.
Adjourn
for instance.
and deal with this matter specifically in a special meeting, if it so wished.
Well, I can indicate what I propose to do if I can find someone that can take the chair, because the mover and seconder probably should not. And as the deputy mayor's not here,
There is a process to do that though, Mr Mayor, under the meeting procedures, and I can't recall what it is without
will I
looking
go
it
and
up.
get the act? Shall I go and get the act?
Can I just
Yeah,
say that
please.
I think that this is, this matter's been particularly poorly handled. I think we need to make a decision in relation to it, and I respectfully suggest that you put the motion.
Well, if you're moving that the motion be now put, you don't need a seconder if my recollection is right. I ask those in favour of the motion that the motion be now put to raise their hands. Against? It's carried, so I have to put the motion. I move the, go on, councillor Breeny.
There's two things I need clarified here, and that is what you said about no need for a seconder.
It's a procedural motion, if my understanding is correct. Generally speaking, on a procedural motion, that the motion be now put that doesn't require a seconder.
Even though it has already been seconded?
I seconded it.
Yeah.
Oh, had you seconded?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I didn't
we-
see it.
No, if I may, we're talking about two different motions here. We're
I'm
absolutely
talking about your
not.
procedural motion.
I suggested that, yes, a procedural motion, that
Yes.
that the motion should be put.
Yes.
But there's some confusion, I think, in relation to which motion's being put.
Well, your procedural motion, when you say, I move the motion be now put, I was getting that movement supported or not supported.
I think
that
the
clarifies. Thank
procedural
you.
motion these days does require a seconder.
I
think-
can't recall the section of the Act,
Through you, Mr. Mayor,
general meeting procedure, it doesn't.
Councillor Arnold's motion is the original motion, that's what you're talking about.
The motion,
That
be
you-
put.
That you moved and councillor Simons seconded.
There has been debate from Councillor Arnold regarding that motion and Councillor Simons, and no one else?
Is that correct?
Yep. So you would have a right of, yeah.
As I understand it, there are two motions before the chair. One is the procedural motion Councillor Arnold just put, that the motion be now put. That is a procedural motion. And we have to decide whether that procedural motion will get up or not, as I understand it. Am I correct?
You could be. My interpretation of what was asked for my vote when I was asked to vote was that we were voting for the first motion, and I wasn't clear as to what was going on there. So I thank you for clarifying that, and if you could put that motion, I'll be able to clarify my situation.
And there is another motion which was before the procedural motion, the motion that Councillor Arnold put with all the conditions. And I just can't remember the meeting procedure. I've got it in my room, but I have to look it up.
Mayor, can we get some clarification on that, please, before, to make sure that the procedural motion does not need does not need a
Passage.
seconder?
Oh, I see.
Mr Mayor, if I may, I believe Mr Woodward might have the answer
Yeah,
to that.
Mr Woodward, please.
Through you, Mayor, procedural motions are to be moved and seconded as with any other motion.
Oh, I see. Well, it's a procedural motion. Councillor Arnold, your motion was that the original motion be now put. Is there a seconder for that procedural motion? That's Councillor Brady. Now, I put that procedural motion only. All those in favour, raise their hand. Well, I'm voting against it, it's carried. So therefore, I have to put the original motion, which was one that Councillor Arnold put in the form of the recommendation in the minutes, which finish on page 33, page 32, start on page 30. All those in favour?
No,
Oh, I think,
Right, go on.
thank you, Mayor. I'd like to speak in relation to that motion.
Well, you can't, we've got a motion which was passed that the thing be now put.
Without debate.
Yes, it's gone.
So my reasons for maybe
Voting for again, you can't tell us.
No, my reasons for any variation can't be put, or confirmation can't be put to council? Okay, thank you.
It's finished. All those in favour of the motion to be found on page 30 to page 32 in the agenda, raise their hands. Against? So we're
Haven't
nowhere.
made a decision.
We're nowhere. I think we'll have to have an adjourned meeting on this. So the meeting, we'll go on to the next thing and it might give us some relief. Item page.
No,
You have to-
we're
you have to
planning
finish
authority.
this.
What?
You got to adjourn this to another time.
Well, my recollection is that I can adjourn the consideration of this motion to a date to be advised. And I think I can do the advising, and I think we can do it under the COVID regulations because of their peculiar nature by phone or Zoom or something like that, should we so desire. Now, I think I have the right to advise the date, and I don't think I have to do it now. Is that correct? I need to know before we'll go what would be a good date that would be suitable for people. Yes, please, Councillor Arnold.
Mr Mayor, if I may, the meeting procedures allow that at any time during a meeting, the chairperson, subject to sub-regulation 2, may adjourn the meeting to a later date or to a later time on the same day. The chairperson may only adjourn a meeting for a proper purpose, and if it is reasonable to do so in the circumstances and in good faith. It talks about adjourning a meeting, not a matter.
All right, well, what we'll do, councillors, I won't close the meeting, I'll adjourn it to a date. But I won't do it now because
Okay.
Then, if I may, Mr Mayor, it then goes on, if a meeting is adjourned for a period which would allow a special meeting to be convened, the general manager is to publish in a daily newspaper or a prescribed newspaper circulating in the relevant lab. The meeting has been adjourned, the date and time of the resumption of the meeting, and the date and time of the resumption of
Could
the
you
meeting.
read the
So-
first few lines, please, councillor Arnold?
Beg your pardon?
Could you please read the first few lines again?
So it goes on, if the meeting is adjourned, the person is to ensure that any business of the chairperson is to ensure that any business of the meeting not then disposed of is given precedence at the resumption of the adjourned meeting. So that would,
Yeah.
for all intents and purposes, be this planning matter. At the adjournment of a meeting, the chairperson is to advise the councillors present of the date and time when the meeting is to be resumed and of the reasons for the adjournment. If a meeting is adjourned, the general manager is to advise the councillors not present at the meeting that the meeting was adjourned, and the date and time of the resumption of the meeting and the reasons for the adjournment, and the reason for the adjournment of the meeting is to be recorded in the minutes. And part 7 is, if a meeting is adjourned for a period which would allow a special meeting to be convened, the general manager is to publish in a daily newspaper and all of that the meeting has been adjourned and the date and time of the resumption of the meeting.
Councillor Arnold, you know a lot of those rules very well, and thank you for that.
Well, I'm cheating, Mr Mayor, because I'm actually reading it from the...
It's a very handy thing. I like your computer skills as well as your typing skills, but does it say what the prerequisites are for a special meeting?
Its prerequisites relate to, I think it's, there has to be, there's a specified publication time. I can't recall what that is.
We wouldn't be able to do specified publications, so it may be the adjournment is not one that would fit within the qualification of special meeting. That's the reason I asked the question.
So I guess my question in relation to this is, does the chairperson have the right to adjourn a matter, or does it have to be the whole meeting? It's got to be the whole meeting.
Kerry, through you,
Yeah,
Mr Mayor, it is the whole meeting, and that's what council needs to consider.
Yeah.
The whole
We have
meeting
to
would
do
need
it
to be adjourned until another time.
But if we do it,
Even
we'd have to advertise, and the time would have gone by the time we come on, and it needed to be approved, to be approved.
Through you, Mr Mayor, that is also in consideration from the planning, from the specific planning matter, yes.
What's the statutory date?
5th of December.
5th of December.
Thank you.
Is it, may I ask, is it the, because it's a planning matter and we're acting as the planning authority, does that separate it from the remainder of the meeting?
That's a valid issue to raise. I'd put it another way. Local Government Act deals with council acting as a council and all the procedure related to that. Land Use and Planning Approval Act deals with planning authority, and does the Local Government Act deal with land use and planning appeal procedure? It's a question I don't know the answer to.
The matter is lost.
I think if I may, I think the
Matters
meeting procedures relate to both
Well,
Planning.
you might be right.
general meeting. I
might be wrong. I don't know
can't-
the answer.
I can't guarantee that.
No, that's right. Thank you. It's a matter that concerns me. Well,
Mr Mayor, could I make a suggestion?
please do.
That you adjourn this meeting for half an hour to get some further advice.
Well, from whom?
Well, just
Just-
get
just
some
allow
further
us to-
advice. So if I
All right,
make
but
it
look, thank you very much for that. I adjourn the meeting until 4:20, and that'll give our general manager the chance to ring someone up and try and get some advice from someone.
yeah.
All those in favour of adjournment,
To
sir?
be reconvened at, say, 4:15.
4:15 will do. Give him, yes, thank you. No, that's fine.
And we'll stop.
Would you please, please close the